Okay, so you can go, if you go to my wall, to my Facebook page, just share it if you want it to your page or to your Schul's page.
Yep.
I think we're all familiar with this by now.
Just doing that now.
Tell me when you're ready, and then we'll get underway.
Okay. Search. Sorry, one sec.
All right, are you good to go?
Sharing it now.
Thank you, everybody, for your patience. We will be ready shortly.
Okay, there we go. Sharing.
Awesome.
Brilliant.
All right, good afternoon, Yossi, and good afternoon, everybody else, for joining us. Thank you for joining us. And as we were just talking before you came on, Yossi, I was saying, like, we were sort of an experiment to see if this time would work. But somebody, very cleverly said that everybody's at home, so it's a nice thing. Even if you're busy doing chores at home, you can put it on and just listen. So thank you for the idea, and thank you for getting in touch. As always, we've done this before at other times. It's always lovely to schmooze with you and to chat with you and to learn with you. How are you managing in the holy New South Wales?
Yes, no, thank you, Daniel, and I echo that completely. I thoroughly enjoyed the series that we did before holidays last year, and it's so nice to bring our communities together and have this cross-state community discussion, interaction, and always nothing makes me happier than when people who have been on a discussion from different communities then interact by themselves and they make connections, and
absolutely,
part of it as well. I thought I would
we're happy to take your Divrei Torah from New South Wales, but you can keep your virus for yourselves.
I know. We far outdone you guys. Last year we thought we were so ahead of the game, and now you're looking at us, and
we need blessing for all of our states, for the whole country, and for the whole world, in fact. But we'll get to that, I'm sure.
Exactly. So Daniel, maybe I thought I would start blowing the shofar. And it's my hope that it draws down only blessing for us. And in the spirit of the discussion, kind of helps us to open up and share some insights and Torah and blessing. So
absolutely,
I'll just do that. I'm going to turn on the special setting here so you can actually hear it on the Zoom. You know about that setting, right?
Someone told me that the shofar, you can't hear it on Zoom if you don't do something. What do you have to do?
You've got to go into settings, and you've got to turn on the original sound. It's called turn on original sound.
Oh.
And then it works much better. And then when you finish, you turn off the original sound.
Wow.
So you tell me if this works. I've turned it on, and you can play around with that and see if that works.
Okay.
All right.
Wow. Yeah, the sound was good. It was very clear, very crisp. Someone said to me we should have a rabbi's shofar competition. Who can blow the longest, who can, So maybe that's for another time.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
Who got the longest tekiah gedola,
The biggest lungs.
Yeah, so we felt that it was important for us to chat about certain things, current things, and we listed a number of topics on the flyer, like forgiveness, kindness, compassion, self-worth. So Yossi, I don't know if there's a particular point you want to start on that list, and hopefully we'll get through some of them. Obviously, we could probably talk about just one of them before time. And I know Yossi needs to be out of here by about 1:15.
Yes.
Hopefully we'll get some inspiration, some insight, some discussion going. The time that we have.
Well, I would definitely like to, number one, to achieve, firstly, the discussion, finding out what the environment is in Melbourne right now, how you're all managing lockdowns, how holidays coming up. It's going to be very different for us in New South Wales, especially. You guys last year had didn't really, you had no shul for high holidays, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah, sadly, this might be our second year, so we have a little bit of experience
Yeah,
in terms
yeah,
of how to navigate this time.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, for us as well, I mean, we're kind of looking on what you guys did last year as well, and there's been incredible interaction here with the rabbis, the rabbinical council, who have come together and developed daily shofar blowings with all the different rabbis, putting a shofar blowing on every morning, plus a little idea. Plus, there's talk about chauffeur blowings around town as well, maybe in parks as people are exercising. They can run past the park and hear a blast. Whether that will happen or not, they're in discussion with the government, with the health authorities, and whether they'll get approval or not is still to be seen. But again, trying to figure out how we're going to do it this year. And you guys, obviously, as you mentioned, you've had that experience.
Yeah, and we're relaunching. Obviously, we had hoped we'd never have to relaunch this, but we're relaunching our Project High Holidays early next week, and all the resources that we put together last year, of course, will now come back to the forefront, and new ideas, new things. I mean, one of the leading discussions in our meetings has been the mental health of the community, and really that we as rabbinic leaders, need to stress its importance and acknowledge how challenging this is, regardless of your circumstance. Of course, there's varying levels within that scope of how people are handling it. Some, of course, handle lockdowns and they're not financially impacted upon, or maybe they don't have young children. But there's no judgments to be made about anyone, because we all deal with it in our own way. And I think we as a rabbinical council, certainly in Victoria, want to stress that as, I guess, the opening of our Project High Holiday, looking out for each other, being there for each other, and making sure that we take care of our own well-being as well as if we have the ability to help others,
100%. I was going for a run actually an hour ago down by Coogee Beach. I had a quick transformation, quick shower and change for this chat.
You look so fresh and alive,
Yeah, I find, and talking about self-care, I find, no matter what's going on, we're in this lockdown, and even, in my family as well, we had twin baby girls now 2 months ago. So not really sleeping much. And it's kind of like a high pressure environment in my house, with juggling 3 older kids, homeschool, a 4-year-old who doesn't quite want to go to his daycare.
Yeah.
I always try and find time for myself every single day, an hour, try and get out, listen to a podcast, refresh my soul, refresh my mind. But this morning, I actually saw something beautiful as I was running along Coogee. Along the fence there, children had, I think, started this initiative. And now everyone has taken part. Like, there are so many messages that people are hanging up on with little pegs on the thin wire of the fence, like be kind and take care of one another, or make one phone call. It's coming from the community in Coogee, in the area there, and there must be like 500 little notes of all shapes and sizes, people encouraging everyone else during this time just to be thoughtful of yourself and to be thoughtful for others. And I just thought it was such a beautiful thing.
It really is. I just want to give a shout out. One of my cousins I just saw her post on Facebook, Sancha, she's in Toronto and she's watching our chat. So hi, Sancha, please send my love to all the Ravens in Toronto, in Canada. But yeah, I agree with you. Like, it's interesting because I know that you're a really prolific runner. I bought a Garmin watch some months ago in the last lockdown, earlier last year, but I didn't buy it because I was a runner, and everybody was saying to me, "Oh, tell me about your runs." And I'm like, "I don't run." They're like, "Why did you buy a Garmin watch?" So I said it was there to serve as an inspiration to run. And now I've started I do a lot of training, but I wasn't into running, but I've started this new thing, hill running. There's a hill near my house, and I do it 2 or 3 days a week, where I'm running up the hill and then walking down, and I do it for about 5Ks, and I'm loving it. You feel so refreshed, and I come back recharged and ready to meet the day.
Well, what do they say? You've got to put yourself where you want to be, right? So exactly. Yeah, I think you 100% made the right choice to get a Garmin, because that's where you want to be. You want to be in that state, and that will give you that motivation. I actually don't have a Garmin. That's one of my inspirations, is to get a Garmin. So
you're doing the running first, then the Garmin. I got the Garmin and then the running.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
So look, I think the topic which I probably the most important to address at this time of year, and I guess even what's happened recently in Victoria, but that whole concept of forgiveness.
Yes.
And you asked, what's the current temperature like right now? And I'm sure everyone that's on this chat and that's watching even though you guys are in New South Wales, you're alive on social media, you see what's happening. And
Yes.
and it's been a very, very difficult week within the Jewish community, both internally and externally, with the anti-Semitism that's really come alive. And you know, I saw a really important message that someone said, and it's like, you know, Jewish people don't cause anti-Semitism. Anti-Semites cause anti-Semitism. And I think that's something we have to always remember, that just because some people in the Jewish community did the wrong thing, there's never an excuse for the vitriol, for the hate, for, you know, casting a shadow on the entire Jewish community. Internally, I think there's been a lot of pain, a lot of hurt, a lot of disappointment. People are still reeling from it. And I think what's made this very unique is that our premier, look, I don't know if he directly did this on purpose, or if it was just happened to be, you know, coincidental that they came one after the other. But a lot of the community sort of felt that the actions of those people that were in the media caused the additional lockdown. And I think for people who have had to stay additionally in lockdown with the young kids, those whose businesses have to remain closed, those who are just struggling in general, you know, there's that anger, and it's like, well, you know, let's point fingers. Where can we throw our hurt? And so, yeah, I think there's been a lot of time now for people to feel that hurt and pain, and obviously it's a buildup of all the lockdowns. And I think it's still raw to some degree, but at the same time, I think it's time to take a pause and to reflect. And I'd like to share shortly, obviously I'm happy for you to respond in a minute, but about forgiveness in general. You know, what are the rules of teshuvah in terms of if someone has wronged you, how do you have to accept, you know, there's this famous, I don't know if it's a myth or it's not a myth, but it's a famous well-known thing that if somebody asks you to forgive them 3 times and you don't forgive them, then they're absolved. So, like, is that true? Is that not true? How do we, in fact, go ahead and forgive someone that has wronged us, whether that's personally, whether that's in our smaller surroundings, or perhaps even in a situation like this, within a communal context? How do you find within yourself, and to what degree do you have to forgive? Which we'll get into. But yeah, that's really, I think, the feeling right now. And again, one more point, sorry, is that, you know, there are people who are upset at how the reaction of the community has been. You know, even though these people did the wrong thing, I think people are upset at how the hatred internally has erupted. So there's so many different sides, so many different emotions. People are going through all different things. And I think there's going to be a point where we just have to pause and take a check-in with yourself and say, where do I sit on this, and how can I differ in my approach and my actions? And yeah, I think that's probably how I would sum up the feeling right now.
Nice, thank you. I must admit, you know, when I heard about that incident in Melbourne, I must admit I felt sick in my stomach. You know, I was hoping, you know, everyone would do the right thing and something like this wouldn't happen. And you know, just it's hard to understand why something like this, you know, or how something like this could happen. And just seeing, you know, like on social media, and just, you know, the arguments and the outpouring of all different emotions. And I think obviously, you know, everyone's is trying to process it, and everyone has their emotions, and they're valid, these valid emotions as to you know what took place. But I think, you know, in terms of the anti-Semitism, what you mentioned beforehand, I think you're 100% right that, you know, I think every community has elements. You know, I think the wrong thing is to judge a whole community based on the actions of a few. Every community has people who will keep the law, and has people who will push boundaries and not keep the law. That's standard. We're not unique in that. But, you know, to blame and to label and to stereotype an entire community or people, you know, the Jewish people and the anti-Semitism that we've seen, that is just inexcusable. And I think, you know, I think you're right that, you know, I think people sometimes look for excuses. They have this hatred in their heart. They don't like Jews, they're anti-Semitic, and then something will happen and boom, now this has given them a reason to be able to come out and attack and, you know, release their aggression. So I think, you know, in some way it has released a lot of that, but that's, you know, it's not excusable.
Yeah, and it's a tough thing to deal with. You know, I think people are scared. People are, you know, you feel like all eyes are on you. Even when it's interesting. I was going for a run yesterday, and it was like at one point I was thinking, you know, are people looking at me? I obviously look religious. I am Jewish. I wear a kippah, you know, and are they looking at me saying, you know, you're part of a group that breaks laws, or you're Jewish, and you do sort of think that way. And we've just got to remain committed to who we are as people and to be proud of our heritage, proud of our Judaism. And I think one of the things which is important is that the community did call out the wrong actions, and I think that was important. I think we got to speak out when people do the wrong thing.
100%.
The tone of that, I think that's very debatable. And the messaging of that is very debatable. I think that's what has caused the massive divide in terms of how you react to such a thing. But I'd like to share very quickly, if I may, certain principles when it comes to forgiving someone else. I think it was 2 years ago, I did a feature for the Jewish News at the time. They asked me, I think they had a number of rabbis, and they said, questions that they had been asked and they wanted rabbis to address. And one of the questions they asked me to address was, if somebody has wronged you, do you have to forgive them? And how does that work? And I answered it in 3 ways based on teachings from different Talmudic texts and halachic texts. First thing is, if somebody genuinely wants to apologize to you and is authentic about it, then there's a couple of things. Number one is, just because they want to apologize, it doesn't mean that they must not face the consequences of their wrongdoing, which means apologizing doesn't absolve you from the wrong you did, right? Apologizing may make amends at some point, but if you've hurt somebody, if you've stolen money from someone, it doesn't mean like, I'm going to say sorry. No, you still have to pay back what you stole, or whatever context the wrongdoing was. So apologizing and forgiving doesn't mean that the person who wronged is absolved, number one. The next thing is, there's sort of 3 stages. The first stage of forgiving somebody is a lower stage, but it's a difficult stage if somebody's hurt you badly, and that is to not hate the person or wish evil on them. Sometimes if someone wrongs you, you're like, you hear people saying, I pray for this person's demise all the time. And so the lowest level, but it's a very difficult level, is to say, you know what, I'm going to forgive the person by not wishing them ill. That's the first step. If you can go beyond that, number 2 is that you don't allow the anger to hurt yourself, that you don't allow it to continuously eat up in you. So I'm forgiving them. And so the anger that I'm feeling for this person is obviously being a lot more detrimental to me. And so therefore I'm going to stop being angry. Again, another hard level. And that's the second level of forgiveness. The highest level of forgiveness, which is not always possible, I have to say, depending what the person did to you, the highest level of forgiveness, but again, I reiterate, it's not always possible, is to try and restore that relationship. That, of course, is ideal if it's possible. So from a very basic level is, don't wish the other person ill wishes. Number 2 is, don't be angry about it anymore. Don't let it eat you up. And number 3 is, let's see if we can restore the relationship. So I think those are different things that you can process, whether it be in your own lives, be in a communal life, or in a more global sense, how we can forgive others.
Yeah. And if I could just take that also to perhaps a different angle, because different steps of forgiveness, and it can actually be really hard. It can be hard just to let go. Like how do you actually do that? Especially when you're caught up in the moment, there are so many different emotions, and you're actually upset about it, and you feel like this person doesn't deserve forgiveness. I mean, what they've done, even if it is sincere, one apology that takes him, or her 1 or 2 minutes, that's going to make up for what they've done to me or done to others. It just doesn't. Sometimes it's very hard. And I actually think of, 2 things. Number one is Nelson Mandela. He spent 27 years of his life behind bars, and famously, in the introduction to his book, The Long Walk to Freedom, a few pages in his introduction, he says that as he's walking towards those gates, about to be liberated for 27 years, he had to make a decision. Would he continue to carry that hatred in his heart, or would he let go? And he writes that as he walked out of those gates and he looked at the prison wardens and the guards, he made that decision to let go, because you can't go on to live life. And I think a few years later, he became leader of the country. And, you can't go and become a leader and guide and inspire and achieve what you are able, what you're meant to achieve, if you're holding these grudges, if you're holding hatred. Because I think example he gives is that it's almost like drinking poison and hoping the other person will suffer or will die from that poison. No, it doesn't work like that. You're the one who's going to suffer. And so I think it's actually very healthy. And I think psychologists and mental health professionals will actually admit this and say this all the time, that for your own mental health and well-being, it's often important to let go. And when different things happen to you, yes, things that were wrong need to be corrected. And you do need to get that apology. And if something was taken from you, it needs to be returned. But after that has happened, and after that person has tried their best and has given their apology, and after the right has been wronged, important to move on and to let go, because each of us has something that we can achieve in life. And, life is short, and we can't let things hold us back. So that's one thing I wanted to share. But the second thing, I guess, is also looking in the Torah about Joseph, and that incredible story. To me, that's probably one of the greatest stories of forgiveness in the whole Torah, where, his brothers, literally his life is just sent on this crazy path that he never imagined. He wanted to stay close to his family, live a life of a shepherd, in the fields of spirituality. And yet his brothers were jealous of him. They sold him to Egypt. And eventually he became, the hero that he did, and sustained his country and many others. But when finally his brothers came to him in Egypt, they didn't recognize him. He reveals himself to his brothers. The Torah tells us that his brothers were scared because they thought maybe he would now, he would have this grudge, and he would try and take vengeance against them and punish them for what they did to him. But he answers so beautifully. And he says these beautiful words that it wasn't you who sent me here, rather it was Hashem. The idea of being a messenger, that, even when things do happen to you in life, and yes, things, you may want to punish the messenger, and maybe that messenger needs to be punished, but perhaps there's a divine plan. There definitely is a divine plan behind it. And, don't let these things hold you back, but rather see them as, this is why I'm here. And look at the man Yosef became. He chose to let go, and he saw himself as a man on a mission. And everything that happened to him, was able to express who he was meant to become. So I think that's a beautiful perspective in helping us to overcome these, even though it's so hard, having that perspective that, I'm in a place at a certain time in history. I've been put into the world. There's something that only I can achieve. That's why Hashem put me here, because I'm unique and I am special. And I mean, that's an incredible thought in and of itself, and very empowering. And when things happen to me, yes, I have to make sure and do the best that I can to ensure that only righteous and good things take place, but ultimately to let go, to move on, and to live the best lives that we can.
I think very well said and very well put. And going back to your initial point after I mentioned those three things, that it's very hard to let go of that anger. And how do you do that? And you quoted two, shining role models in that regard. Nelson Mandela and Yosef Atzadik, who were able to really be prepared to recognize that forgiving would be, I guess, beneficial for them and for the people around them. But that's why I think that first step, and it's very hard, as you said, to sometimes let go of the anger.
Yeah.
It's very hard to, and to restore the relationship is even more difficult at times, depending on the circumstance. And that's why I think, as a minimum, if you want to feel like you've done the mitzvah of forgiving, I think we all can find within ourselves not to wish another person, that they should suffer, and I think that's a starting point. And if you can at least get to that, you've done well. But if we can go beyond that, and you can learn from the greats that have come before us and that have been able to put things into perspective, like you've just said, to recognize that it's all part of Hashem's plan. And I think sometimes it's about time. It's about, in the heat of the moment, it's impossible. It's like, when somebody's been bereaved, God forbid, and you and I deal with this on a daily basis, or on a regular basis. I shouldn't say daily basis, chas v'shalom. But, you don't want to say certain words when a person's at a time of loss. You don't want to say, oh, Hashem controls the world and this is all part of his plan. Like, the person doesn't hear that. Yeah. They're sitting and grieving. It's like blaring loud music in the ears. They're like, what did you just say? This is hurting my ears. And the same thing when somebody's been hurt. I think you've got to gradually do those things. But yes, once you've got time to process and you can learn from others, like you've just mentioned, those two people who were able to do that on a major scale, then yeah. But I think we all at times, and I'd like to just add maybe, forgiving yourself. Sometimes we think about forgiving others, but there's also a level of forgiving yourself, which a lot of people don't allow to progress. You may have done something wrong. You may have felt that you haven't lived up to certain expectations of your parents, of your teachers, of your friends, of your spouse, of your colleagues. And then people live with this constant, and I think maybe it can ties into our next topic, which is really that self-worth. You live the whole time not believing in yourself, not doubting yourself, feeling you're not worthy. So sometimes you need to forgive yourself and say, look, even if I haven't lived up to anyone's expectations, I'm moving forward. I'm forgiving myself. And self-worth is a major topic. It's something which I feel I address so many times in the day without people even realizing it. And if you go to psychologists and counselors, so many of the people that sit before them, it's because someone's told them that they're not worth anything, or they're not worthy, or they don't deserve. And you said it just moments ago, you know, the fact that you're breathing means Hashem says, I want you, you are worth it, you deserve to be here, no one else could take your place. If we can drum that into our minds, hopefully that can heal any other negative feedback or, you know, years of continuous telling you that you're not worthwhile, and that can hopefully change your belief about yourself.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's the very first step. I think before you can learn to forgive others, you need to learn to forgive yourself. And you know, there's that famous, you know, pasuk, or the famous, in fact, maybe the whole Torah can be boiled down to this one idea, which is v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You have to love your neighbor as you love yourself. But there are three powerful words. Love your friend or your neighbor as you love yourself. So you have to actually love yourself. Correct. And first, you need, and if you don't know how to love yourself, then how are you going to learn to love your neighbor and forgive your neighbor? And I think we do this all the time, myself included. I often catch myself, you know, like being very strict with myself and saying, oh, I should have done this better. And it's almost like, you know, when people come to you as a rabbi, you know, they want your counsel, they want your guidance. And often you hear from a bird's eye view what they're going through, and it seems to you quite clear, and you can give them some advice as to how they should live. But then often when it comes to you yourself, and I think about this very often, you know, we're often very hard on ourselves. And I think to myself, if I was explaining this to you, let's say I came to you for a session, what would you tell me? Or what would I instruct someone else who was sitting there with the same dilemma? And then I actually say, you know, I would actually be telling them this and this and this. So why don't I tell myself that in my mind?
Very good.
Right? But I'm so much harsher, and you know, you cut yourself down. And I heard a beautiful idea about one of the reasons why we repeat Kol Nidre 3 times, because we're actually, you know, teaching ourselves to be kind and to let go of, you know, those commitments and the things that we tell ourselves, and we put ourselves in boxes. We limit ourselves. So we're actually letting go of those, you know, oaths or those paradigms that we confine ourselves to. And I think, you know, the very first one has to be, you know, you need to learn how to self-love and how to give yourself that space and be kind to yourself. And I think when you're in that space, when you learn to love yourself, then you can look out to others and be more genuine, be more patient, be more forgiving.
Totally.
Yeah. So,
I mean, there's a great story about self-worth. I've used it before in a sermon. You probably know the story. I don't know, you know, but there was a particular high school where there was one particular grade or class which just every year, like from year 7, 8, 9, 10, they just had been zuliks, you know, no teachers, many teachers quit and left, and just a bunch of troubled kids, you know, kids who the principal, you know, on many occasions suspended, wanted to expel. Anyway, it was the next year, they were going into year 11 or something, and they got a new teacher. And, you know, the teacher had been warned about this particular class. And anyway, before the teacher joined, they gave the teacher a class list. And anyway, 6 months into it or 3 months into it, I don't recall exactly the timing, this class had turned around. They were so menschlich, they were nice, they were incredible. And the principal called in the teacher, and they said to the teacher, he said, look, I really, you know, am amazed by your class. I mean, this class has been terrible. You know, they've been worse than terrible. And all of a sudden they've been incredible. And the teacher was looking like dumbfounded. And the teacher said, look, I don't understand what everybody's complaining. These people are amazing. And more than that, with kids with such a high IQ and such high intelligence, I wasn't expecting anything less. So I was denying the rumors. And the teacher said, what do you mean such high IQs? Who told you their IQs? We don't give out that information. And he said, no, you gave me a class list in the beginning, and next to it was a number. And I assume that's the IQ of the child. And he said, no, that was the locker number for the child. You know, so it was 180, 181, 185, 100. And so this teacher's perception of these kids was that they were getting these incredible students, these gifted students. And amazingly, when the teacher looked at them with a different lens and treated them with the self-worth that they are special, and although that they had challenges, when they were treated with the right dignity, they turned around. And so often it's often people are not allowing you to be yourself because they're telling you you're not worthwhile, you're not good, you don't belong. I even had an experience when I was in year 7. Maybe this one turned me into a rabbi one day, but we had this principal called David Chazdan, and one of our teachers was sick, and he came to take the class. And I remember he was teaching us Chumash, and I remember I picked up my hand and I asked a question. And he stood up with excitement. He said, "You've just asked Rashi's question. You've just asked Rashi's question." And he was like shouting. And I was like, "I asked Rashi's question." Wow. And I felt so proud of myself. And every time he took over the class, he'd always say, "No, Daniel, what's Rashi's question?" And it changed my whole, like, I wasn't enjoying Jewish studies, but his belief in me, and he's saying, "You can do this. You can ask such questions." It turns around. So we got to remember that if anyone's told you, "No, you can't, you're not good enough, you're not worthy enough," we've got to go back and say, "Hold on a minute. That's you telling me. That's not Hashem saying you're not worthwhile." Yes. So it's a very important time as we lead into the Chagim to refocus and realign with that.
And you know, often it's not even what people say to you. Sometimes it's the unwritten gestures. It's how they make you feel.
Yes.
So, and that's where I think where it gets tricky to actually try and figure out what it was. Or if you look back in your life, you know, what were the incidents that shaped you? Often they weren't when people directly said something to you, but it was, you know, how they treated you or what they expected of you, as you said. And, you know, there's that famous phrase that, you know, in life, you remember most, not what people say to you, but you remember how they made you feel, how you felt in that moment. Yeah. And, you know, like that beautiful story that you mentioned with you, you know, where they picked you up and they made you feel like you asked Rashi's question, you know, like, you know, you just felt so amazing. And I think every morning, Hashem tells us the same thing. You know, we say the very first words out of our mouth, the Modeh Ani. What's the last two words of that small prayer meditation that we say? It's Rabbi Emunatecha. We're saying to Hashem, great is your faith, that you believe in us. And even if I don't believe in myself so much, but you've given me my soul back for another day, it means that you trust me, that I'm able to do something. I may not know now what it is I'm able to achieve, but you believe in me. That's why you've restored my soul to me today. And every day, if we just think about these powerful words that we say every morning, it's so self-affirming that Hashem believes in us. And, you know, it's like that teacher in that most magnificent story. Hashem is saying, you know, I know where you can be and you're incredible. And just, you know, think about that and go on to achieve because I believe in you.
Yeah. And, you know, it's the sad thing is that it's not so easy, you know, because perpetual putting down of someone really, you know, shapes their brain and their belief in themselves. There's the famous experiment called the Flea Experiment, you know, where they had fleas in a little tub, and the fleas just kept, you know, trying to jump out, and obviously every time they jumped, they hit the top, and then they took the lid off, and the fleas only jumped to that height. And the concept was that the more you tell a person they can't get ever higher than that, you know, a teacher tells a student you'll never succeed at whatever you do, or a sports person tells you, you know, your sports coach says you'll always be useless. The more you hear that message, then you won't even be able to jump. Like it's like they say the elephant in the circus. You know, the little baby calf. You know, when it's young, it gets tied to a little string, or, you know, to a little chain, and then you see this huge elephant which could easily destroy the whole building. It doesn't move. It's like the little chain holds the elephant. We didn't have any of this animal abuse, but I'm saying, you know, the imagery. And you say, how does that work? And animal psychologists will tell you, because from the very moment it was a calf, it knew it couldn't pull that. And now as a grown adult, as a strong bull, it still believes that it's not possible, because it's been hammered into it. You cannot do this. You can't do this. It's not possible. And human beings are no different. We get molded, we get shaped. And so, like you said, it's important. If you have the ability to influence something, I think as parents, it's so crucial that we're very careful with what we say to our kids, because you could be perpetuating a belief in their minds and saying, you can't do this, or so on and so forth, you know?
Yes. And, you know, I think just kind of going from there to, you know, the times in which we stand, high holidays are coming, and you and I have communities that, you know, that will, you know, won't be in shul this year. And I think the key message, or one of the key messages that I'm feeling pulled towards, and I want to share with my community, you know, and I'm sure you with yours, is that, you know, while you're not in shul, and while, you know, on normal years, you know, perhaps congregants normally rely, so to speak, on their rabbis and on the chazanim, you know, to kind of draw down blessings, and so we'll all be blessed for a good year. But I think, you know, for me, a lot of the messages is it's about empowering everyone in the community. You don't need to be a rabbi. You don't need to be a chazan. You don't need to even say all the prayers from the machzor, but choose a few and say them with all your heart and all your soul. And that is what is most important. And, you know, we believe in you. Hashem believes in you. So, you know, talking about, that giving people that almost like empowering them with that self-belief that is what Hashem expects of us in this time. Hashem has given us these challenges, and Hashem can't possibly be judging us like on a normal year that we have to sit in shul for 10 hours and say the whole book. And, it's different this year, and everyone is capable of achieving the greatest heights, just as, if not greater than a normal year. You don't need us as your rabbis. You don't need the chazanim, but you do your best. And that is the greatest that you can do. Beautiful.
I mean, it's funny because I wrote last year, I think in a couple of weeks before Rosh Hashanah. I was dwelling on this exact point that you were saying. I was thinking, like, what is it that we should be telling our community? What is it that we should be thinking about right now? And I came up with a thought, and I said, when it comes to the improvement of ourselves at this time, there's two streams. There's Bein Adam Lamakom, between us and Hashem, how we improve that relationship. And there's Bein Adam LaAdam, between man and man, how we improve our interpersonal relationships. And I said, the interesting thing is we're all so fixated on stream A, because the lockdown and the restrictions, they're all affecting stream A. They're not allowing us to be in shul. We can't have the rabbi there personally. We can't hear the chazanim, as you've mentioned. But Bein Adam LaAdam, between man and man, yes, the lockdown, of course, has influenced that in the sense that we don't have the ability to be together, but your ability to connect with people and to try and find a way to move forward with people. And if there's been strained relationships, you still have that ability to make this Rosh Hashanah meaningful. So I agree with you wholeheartedly that between us and Hashem, you're right. Just go, you're empowered. You sit in your house and just have a frank discussion with Hashem, read a prayer, say something that's meaningful, sit with your kids, go for a walk, whatever it might be. I think Hashem is very much aware of our reality, and He'll take whatever we can offer in our current circumstances. But the interpersonal side, there's no excuse to blame that on the lockdown necessarily, to say I'm just going to ignore people and not have to deal with them because I'm in lockdown. No, you can still try and mend those relationships. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, because you may not be able to go for a coffee or for extended time to visit people, or whatever the rules are in a particular situation. I just want to, I'm curious to get your thoughts. Somebody's posed a question, happens to be my cousin on Facebook. They wrote, if somebody has hurt you, knows that they've hurt you, pretends that things are fine and hasn't actually apologized to you, or they've swept it under the rug, the thing that they've done to you, do you just in time forgive and move on? And they go further, if this person is not the kind of person who takes confrontation well and becomes extremely defensive, what do you do? So I don't know if you want to take a stab at that one, Yossi.
That's a good question. It's a very difficult one. What if someone doesn't know they've wronged you, or here where they do, or perhaps they do know they've wronged, but they feel intimidated or scared. It's a good one. But I think in terms of you and how you process it, I think it's perhaps important for you to, in your own mind, say that while this person may not have approached me, or perhaps thinks differently to the way I do, I don't perhaps know where they're at and what's going on in their lives, and to perhaps not in a way judge them, because who knows what they're going through in their relationship, in their own life, and what challenges they have. And in a way to look at them and say, you know what, they're obviously struggling. They obviously have their own issues. Someone who can't take responsibility for their own actions is probably suffering in many other areas of their lives. And I have pity on such a person, but that doesn't reflect on me and my own self-worth. And, it's almost like it's an issue that they have. And if they do approach me and they really do mean it and they are sincere, then that's a different story. And I will forgive. But otherwise, I'm not going to let that cut me down and reduce my own self-worth, but rather, perhaps it's something that they're going through and they're struggling with. And maybe with time, it can be healed some way. I think, it depends. I mean, every case is obviously different.
Absolutely.
But if you can be the bigger person and take the initiative and reach out to them, in reconciliation, I think that's just incredible. Even if you feel that they're the ones who should take the first step. Often I think that can prevent a lot of people coming back together, because each one feels the other one is the one who's in the wrong, and so they should take the first step.
That's right.
Sometimes even if you feel that, sometimes when you reach out to someone, you never know what can happen, and you never know what their side of the story is completely. And And so again, if you're able to do that and overcome that, it could be really, really incredible to see what can happen from that.
I would echo your thoughts, and just add, going back to my initial 3-step process. I think, if they're not prepared to apologize, it doesn't prevent you from the first two steps of forgiveness. It doesn't prevent you from not wishing them, that they should have bad. You can do that even if they haven't genuinely, or even if they've even tried to ask for forgiveness. You can say, look, I'm not going to wish them that they should have trouble. I can do that. The number 2, you could probably even get to that point, and that is to remove the anger, to not allow them to continue to rent space in your head, or take space for free in your head.
Yes.
And the third one, of course, is going to be a challenge. I think that's where Yossi's point is very valid, that to restore a relationship, sometimes it might literally require, and it's challenging and it's difficult. And I sometimes it's very hard to do this. I know from personal experience to reach out. But they say Aaron HaKohen, the great Aaron, the high priest, he saw that in people. It's almost like what he was like. Yossi's, I guess, emulating those words. Aaron would see that there was people in the conflict, and he would go to the one party and say, the other person really wants to talk to you. They feel sorry, and the person would say, oh, really? And then he'd run to the other party and say, the other person is really sorry. They want to make. And both these parties never actually said that, but Aaron was the peacemaker, and he realized it just needed a little bit of a kickstart. And all of a sudden, these two enemies, when they knew that the other person was prepared to engage and was sorry, they started talking. So as you said, Yossi, as you said, every situation is different, and these are general concepts. It might not be applicable to any individual person's situation, but it might in fact be that if you do reach out, you don't know what's going to come. And if the person is, as Sancho mentioned, that the person is stubborn and is tough, okay, you might not be able to achieve the restoration, but at least you know that you've tried or you've made an attempt. But again, it's not always in every circumstance.
I'll tell you what I'm gaining from during lockdown immensely from spending time with my kids. I must say, despite the challenges, and there are many, I think we always have that ability to choose how we look at what happens to us in life. And yes, the challenges are many, but there's also a lot of blessings. And when I look at kids, they're just so incredible in the simplicity. And I think there's so much power in that simplicity. Like you look at, adults have an argument and they may not speak for months, years, or even decades. Whereas kids get into an argument and it's a real argument for them, maybe over a lolly or whatever, or someone hit me. But then 10 minutes later, they're playing together again. And, it's just, I think we have so much to learn from our children. I think as we get older, we become more sophisticated and perhaps cynical and hardened to life. But if we can just learn from our own children how to deal with each other, how to come back together again. I take them out for exercise and I see the way that they are fascinated by some of the simple things. And it just reminds me, look at the beautiful world we're in. Today's a beautiful day with beautiful weather. The fact that we can get out for an hour, that's a blessing. See it from that point of view. Yeah. You see a butterfly, start jumping around with joy. How often do you see adults jumping around with genuine enthusiasm and excitement? You don't see that, but kids get into it. They celebrate life. And so I don't know, I think about this topic and I just think, as much as we try and become mature and we celebrate our maturity as we're older, we want to be adults. I think there's a lot that we should be trying to keep held on to from our childhood.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting, that point about kids, because there's a famous line that says, children choose being happy over being right. Whereas adults, as you said, the more we become so sophisticated and we advance and we think we're mature, we often choose being right over being happy. And as you said, a child could be in a biggest argument with their parent, so angry, and you say, oh, hold on, here's an ice cream. Oh, no problem. I love you, daddy or mommy, All of a sudden the world is great again. Why? Because they'd rather be happy. If they're going to continue being mean and upset, they're not going to get the ice cream. So they'd rather be happy. Whereas adults can go their whole lives, literally, as long as I'm right, I'll sit there miserable, and it's a difficult thing. And also that concept that you mentioned, the children live in the moment. They're very mindful. They live with what's happening right now. We are destroying it for them with all this technology. And it's sad that we don't have a choice right now because we have to put them in front of screens so often. But we want to try and keep the child being a child, to just live with the moment, live with the experience. If we can try and bring out the inner child in ourselves in so many different ways.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, it's 1:15. I know we can keep going for a long time, but you said you've got things to move on to. So I want to wish you a Shana Tova Mitzuka. I want to wish you, please God, only health, and you should continue to get a lot of nachas from your children, from your community, and just keep inspiring the masses, through your running, through your divrei Torah, through your just being a human being that you are. And it's wonderful to connect. And maybe we'll do something, another lunchtime coming up in the next couple of weeks. It could be good.
I would love to. I always enjoy schmoozing with you. The conversation just flows. I learn from you. I think we get a kick out of each other, and yeah, Shana Tova to you as well, and good Shabbos. And it's nice to have your community here as well, and to reach out to everyone there, and sending our blessings from lockdown in Sydney to lockdown in Melbourne. And
I have to say that I and you can ask my president who's on here. I think there's been I had booked 3 times to Sydney. Each time, just before I was supposed to go, there was another lockdown in Melbourne, and then of course you had your lockdown. So I'm really can't wait, and hopefully at that time I'll be able to keep up with a bit of a run. I'll come visit you, and I'll come running. You'll show me your favorite beach runs, and we can have a schmooze and a run on the beach.
Would love to. And you have to teach me how to do the gym. I don't step foot into the gym, but you'll have to teach me that.
No worries. Well, look, good Shabbos, everybody. Just enjoy the rest of the day. As Yossi said, go out and take a breath of the fresh air, and let's just try and stay positive and keep well. And as Carol just said, let's Shabbat Shalom, stay safe, well, and sane. Beautifully wrapped up, Carol. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Take care.
Sending love.